Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Engaged Intelligence Trust-Based podcast. This is number 8, I believe. So today I have myself and my co-founder Ben, and we're really delighted to have on board Robin Horsfall, who has a distinguished military career, but spends a lot of time now doing talks and podcasts and influencing people around the areas of collaboration, etc. And that's why we thought it was very pertinent to have him on board to talk about trust, particularly from his perspective. If you remember, we're trying to look at trust from different perspectives. So without further ado, I would like to ask Robin to go and introduce himself, and then we'll get into the podcast. So over to you, Robin.
Well, nice to be here, John and Ben. I'm Robin Horsfall. I was a British soldier from the age of 15 to the age of 27, and then a mercenary, a bodyguard, a paramedic, a sniper, many other things, until finally my wife put her foot down and said, "That's enough. I don't want you doing that again. If you do it again, I won't be here when you come home." And she was talking about war. And so I came home, and people obviously often refer to my military background, but I'm 67 now, and it's only a very small piece of a very long life. I've done many other things since then, including teaching martial arts to children for 20 years, broken my back, broken my neck, went to university at the age of 56 and graduated when I was 59. First thing you learn at university when you're that age is no one wants to sit next to their grandpa at school. I'm a writer. I do try to influence people in the direction of decency more than anything else, and I enjoy where I am now in my life. So that's a good place to start.
Great, Robin. Thanks for that introduction. So, um, you know, first thing is, trust is heavily nuanced. It's contextual. It's a very wide subject, and those nuances and context are very important. So, from your background and your perspective, what does trust mean to you, and how does that resonate for you?
I think it's quite a broad subject, but if I had to try to bring it down to something manageable, I would say one of the biggest factors of trust is consistency. You need to walk into somebody's office, you need to work with somebody knowing what sort of reception you're going to get every time you do that. If you have somebody who occasionally doesn't tell you the truth and then expects you to trust everything they say, then you're going to be wrong. If you get somebody who tries to be nice to you and so doesn't give you the full picture, that is a breach of trust. If you get somebody who betrays your trust, then it doesn't matter what they do after that. Then you're never going to forget it. Consistency is the biggest factor of trust. So you can be a tough boss, you can be a nice boss, but you have to be the same every single day. And then if you are different, people will know that you're having a bad day. They'll know that your heart's in the right place, and they'll forgive that. But if you go into somebody's office one day and they're screaming and shouting and bawling, and the next day they try to be your best friend, you're not going to have any confidence in that person. You're not going to trust them. Trust is, I've had some friends who used to work on the markets in London. And I say, how do you handle these hundreds of millions of dollars every single day? You cannot, the speed you work at, you cannot work with the written contract. They said, yeah, Rob, almost every transaction we do is based on trust. The second that trust is breached, the job's over. That person's finished. You'll never work with them again. And so that's how the world works. It works with trust and confidence, really. And we should get back to that. We should really get back to that.
So you've spoken there about the idea that trust is built up over time with consistency, and trust gets lost very quickly when you betray trust. Do you think that there is, when you've lost trust, that there is any way to regain it again? That there is an approach that you can make to overcome the mistakes that led to trust being dropped?
Sure. I mean, it depends on how serious the breach of trust was. If it's a betrayal, then you might as well go away. You're never going to forgive a betrayal, a personal betrayal. It's not going to happen. However, if you've made a mistake, if you've made an error, if you look at yourself afterwards and say, "Phew, I wish I hadn't done that, I wish I hadn't said that," pull the person into your office, get them in a private place and say, "I screwed up there. I made him. I wish I hadn't done that. It was a mistake." And there's a fair chance that most people, given a period of time, will accept that and move on. And it's what people should be prepared to do. It doesn't mean you have to humble yourself or be pathetic. It just means you have to be honest and turn around and say, "Look, mate, I spoke to you that way yesterday. I was having a bad day. I was wrong. I didn't have the right information. It wasn't your fault. Sorry I did it. I wish I hadn't done it. Can we move on from there?" I would say the vast majority of people will say, "Yeah, let's move on from there and don't do it again."
Mm. That's very interesting, Robin, isn't it? And I think timing's quite important in that, isn't it? If you know that you've messed up, right, to avoid that betrayal, you need to get in there and rectify it in the manner you said relatively quickly. Because I guess in my experiences, when I've seen people delay things, that in itself can erode trust even further because it feels like they're almost over processing it. They have to think about it. And that in itself is partly a betrayal, when in reality, it's that natural reaction to the problem and recognizing it makes a difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you get the American systems of never apologize if you're the boss, never admit you're wrong, never. And I don't. I mean that when I'm thinking about people like Trump when I go down that path. But I have worked for Americans that simply will not, on principle, admit they ever did anything wrong, never apologize, always double down, always beat your opponents into a pulp. And they clearly get some level of success from that kind of management system and behavior, but it's short term, it's short lived, and it's damaging to people. It's damaging to businesses in the long term. But most of the people that I've encountered who work that system work in the short time frame. Profit now, problems later.
Yeah, or they cause destruction behind them and then move on somewhere else and then cause more destruction. There's that.
Yeah.
What's it? The term plausible deniability came from the US, didn't it?
Or implausible deniability as well.
Correct. That's another way of looking at it.
Yeah. I worked for a American called Albert Dunlap, who had the nickname the Chainsaw, and he used to do aggressive takeovers for large corporations. And he had been brought to England by Sir James Goldsmith and John Aspinall to take over British American Tobacco. And I was his personal bodyguard. And I was his personal bodyguard because lots of people wanted to kill him. And he was the classic bully. After 4 weeks, I wanted to kill him myself. And I tolerated him until he bought me out of my contract because my wife was ill in pregnancy. But the most evil human being I'd ever come across in my life, and they're a shock to the system. Even in his case, I did learn something. He used to say to people, "What does that mean?" And there's so many people on the telephone or in business who will try to blind you with science, or even in the medical profession, they'll blind you with science and expect you just to accept it because you feel foolish for not knowing what the hell they're talking about. And what does that mean was something I picked up from him. So when people use terminology, especially in IT, I'll get back to them and say, "Listen, you're talking to a 67-year-old man. I don't know what you mean. Slow it down. Take me through it one step at a time so that I do understand what you're talking about." And a lot of people should focus on that, I think, when they're confused, when they're overwhelmed, and just say, "Stop. What does that mean?" It works very well in boardrooms.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because that in itself is passive aggression. And the character you've described is Mr. Dunlap. A number of those similar characters described in John Ronson's book, The Psychopath Test, which is quite interesting because most psychopaths and sociopaths are very high functioning individuals and display exactly the tendencies that you've described. And I have come across a few of those in my career, as I said, in one American organization or a UK arm of an American organization, which was absolutely totally toxic. I'm not going to go into all the details now, but in my my reaction or my way of dealing with that was to try and flip the culture 180 degrees the other way and instill a coaching culture. That's the only thing I could do. You're not going to beat them at their own game in their own system. You have to change the playing field, to use that sort of vernacular. So any thoughts, Ben, from you on this?
Well, I was wondering, you talked about working for someone who you quickly realized was a bully and who you presumably quickly came to understand you couldn't trust. I wonder how you managed to maintain the. Now, he needed to have complete trust in you in your role as a bodyguard. How did you manage to continue providing that level of trust to him when you had very little trust in how he would react towards you?
Um, I don't think the situation between the two of us was trust. I think there's predominantly need. He needed a professional bodyguard, and I needed to have a stable job in the UK until my wife gave birth. That was the trade-off, and so I tolerated his behaviour, and he needed me for that period of time. It very quickly, only lasted 6 months, but it quickly became a case of we're putting up with each other. I mean, I knew that he during the Vietnam War he'd been a colonel in a nuclear missile silo outside Washington D.C. and had never seen combat. And so I used to get involved in conversations with him and say, talk about war situations, and then say, you know how it is, sir, don't you? You know how it is. And I would deliberately be prodding him because he didn't. And he was too egotistical to admit that he'd never been actually in a combat situation. So there was genuine friction building up. But as soon as my son Oliver was born, and everything was fine at home, we parted company very, very rapidly. So sometimes we have to make those choices. Sometimes we are in a situation we're not happy with, we're not comfortable with. But my recommendation would be don't stay for too long. It's going to wear you down. It's going to destroy your self-confidence. You managed before that person came along. You managed before that company came into the frame, and you'll manage without them no matter what they think. You'll manage without them and you'll move on. There's always a demand for good people.
Do you think you'd have done anything differently now with your experience and having explored relationships and explored leadership in a whole range of ways since then? Is there anything you'd have done differently in retrospect?
No, I think it's just part of the learning curve of life. You have these experiences, and then if it should ever happen again, you can make a quick decision. I was a training officer in the army of Sri Lanka, and after a few months, realised that the people I was training, the officers I was training, were involved in a genocidal process in Jaffna against the Tamils. I was powerless to do anything at that time. I didn't have a public profile, but I could resign. And so I resigned and went home and refused to take part in it. Many years later, I helped a person write a book about it. But you do live and learn. You make your mistakes. You learn to walk by falling over. And sometimes, you get humbled or you feel belittled, and you feel damaged. You get up, you move on. There's a danger for anybody that's abused or hurt to claim victimhood and say, I can't cope. Well, we have to all get up and walk again. And so, we deal with those problems, and we do get up and walk again. And we use that experience to make sure that we don't find ourselves in the same situation with the same type of people again.
Yeah, so you're building up your knowledge and history bank. I mean, that's really interesting because you've talked about walking away from situations once you've got enough knowledge and evidence to understand, and it doesn't fit in with your ethos of decency, which makes total sense. I mean, you alluded to earlier on about dealing with situations in the boardroom as well, or dealing with situations with managers where people are deliberately trying to possibly bamboozle you with language, and you challenge them, which is really important because in my experience, I'd be interested to know what your experience is, that atmospheres fester and fester. They never get better on their own until somebody breaks, the circle in some way by challenging them. And I'd be interested to get your views on this. I when I was doing my coach training, we talked about the difference between conflict and confrontation, and I learned is that it's okay to confront a situation because you need to do that because that's what solves problems. But you don't necessarily need to get into conflict with that individual if you confront the situation, if that makes sense. Robin, get your perspective on that.
Well, I taught at an autistic school for children in Wandsworth many years ago. And as I learned more about autism, I actually came to the conclusion that I may well be high masking autistic because I do not fit well into a group. I do not follow the herd. When people sit around and nod their heads, I'm the person who think they sit there and go, "Oh, why is everybody nodding their heads? It's clear and obvious to me that this isn't the case. This is wrong. We shouldn't do this." And so I'll speak up. That isolates you, but I'm unable to do it. And that's why I've been my own employer for the last 30 years. Because put me into a corporate group and I upset the apple cart. I will confront issues. I will say, well, no, that's not true. You're all wrong. And I read a book by Alistair McAlpine, who took over British Steel for Margaret Thatcher in the 70s, 80s, early 80s. And the book was called The New Machiavelli. And he talks about every chief executive officer having a loyal lieutenant. And I would make a very good loyal lieutenant to a chief executive officer because I'm the only person in the company that will actually speak truth to power. And I will piss him off and I will annoy him and he will not want to speak to me on some occasions. But every chief executive officer should have a loyal lieutenant who speaks truth to power. Chief of staff with presidents is usually the person who has that role. And it's crucial. And the thing about a loyal lieutenant is he'll stay there with you when the ship starts to sink, when every sycophant in the company is running out the door and taking customers with them. So, Alistair McAlpine's book, The New Machiavelli, I recommend it. It's a very old book now, probably hard to find, but he talks about people and how people fit into certain situations. So if you try to raise somebody to their level of incompetence, then you're going to have huge problems with your staff and with your company. What you want is people to rise to their level of competence and stay there and be happy and allow people to go past them who are more competent in certain roles. And it's finding the right place for the right person. As you will know, as a person who's a professional coach, it's not about having the best 6 horses. It's about having the right combination of horses in the team. And that's the true skill of coaching. It's also one of the great skills of high level management as well, making sure you have the right people, not all the best people in the office. I mean, American law companies are very, very well known for picking up all the best people from Harvard and Yale. And yet all they do is get people who are extremely competitive amongst one another, who hate one another, who are always trying to undermine one another in the same business. Whereas what you really want is, to have the very, very best people spread across a series of slightly lesser qualified or capable people so that you build up a team ethic and a confident group.
Yeah, it's really interesting that because I want to come back on that and then bring Ben in, is that what you've just described in terms of the team was Leicester City. If people know football, a few championships ago, where they didn't have a team of singular individuals, they had the right people in the right time and a great leader. But you've described very eloquently there, the Peter principle. We all reach our own level of incompetence, and I'm definitely going to read the book about the new Machiavelli. The other thing that was interesting, you're saying about the loyal lieutenant. I know when I was consulting in Russia, as a company, we were directly dealing with the CEO of a very large petrochemical company, but he had a wonderful loyal lieutenant who was actually had come from the shop floor, had worked all his way up. And in fact, effectively, he was what the concierge to the board, which there was a equivalent of a chief of staff, and he was a really good guy. He was able to understand the dynamics of what was going on, and as you say, speak truth to power. Which, by the way, I'm going to take that expression with me, Robin, because that's extremely powerful. So, yes, Ben, any thoughts yourself on that? Because it's a rich topic.
Well, one thing I wanted to highlight was you were talking about how the loyal lieutenant would often butt heads with the executive they worked with. But of course, what you do have between that executive and the loyal lieutenant inherently is a really high level of trust. It's something that they build up over time, and it's why the loyal lieutenant will go down with the ship rather than trying to take advantage of the situation when something goes wrong.
Yeah.
I guess the interesting point John brought out is that one of the advantages that loyal lieutenant has as well is they are able to provide the view that isn't the view of the executive to other people. So if you are in the American culture that you described earlier, where the executive can admit no wrong, the loyal lieutenant has the ability to talk about what mistakes were made with people in order to
Yeah.
actually make sure things get fixed. Have you come across that sort of environment occurring?
Yeah, I've seen situations where a person will play the game, a chief executive will play the game and appoint somebody as his loyal lieutenant and tell him he wants him to tell him the truth, but he doesn't.
Mm.
So you've employed somebody on a false premise. Essentially, you're playing a game. You're trying to convince yourself and everybody else that this guy's here and you trust him and you want him, but you don't really. And the process that high functioning psychopaths have the ability to get themselves into top management positions on the basis of a bullying ethic is going to create people that will play the game. They're very clever. They'll put people in the right places. They'll say the right things, and it's going to completely ignore them. And it comes back to haunt them later on because they become isolated, surrounded by yes men, and something will be happening within the business. Nobody will dare tell him, and the business will collapse. And they'll move on, and they'll destroy some other business later on. The infection, I think it's an infection that has come across the Atlantic into the British business culture over my lifetime, is where you see this being copied. Everybody has to be a predator. Are you a winner or a loser? There's only one winner. Everyone else is a loser. And that kind of belief system. Profit is everything. I find that whole process vulgar. I find it disgusting. I find it damaging. I think it's bad for business. I think it's bad for the population. It's bad for trust. It's bad for people. And I've seen it creep over into the UK over the last 50 years. And I don't like it. I don't think it creates good business. I don't think it creates good long-term business. I think it's damaging for the whole nation. I think it causes enormous amounts of psychological stress to the staff. It certainly doesn't breed any levels of loyalty to the business. I don't think there's anything that comes remotely close to corporate loyalty these days, in the sense of feeling looked after by the business, being protected by the management. I think people are treated very much as they were in the 18th, 19th century, where they were used and then cast aside. And I think that process has come across to the UK more so as the Americans have introduced more and more laws to protect their own people. They're taking those processes outside of their own country and continuing to use them where the profit's more important than the people.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, Robin, because I that sort of resonates with me. I mean, I have been lucky enough to work for two very large organizations in my early career in the early 80s who were not like that so much, right?
Mhm.
But have actually sort of changed a bit. And it's all driven by money, unfortunately. That's
Yeah,
that's what sits behind it. There was certainly in one of the organizations a my brother's keeper element. And as long as you didn't do anything deliberately wrong within reason, that was okay. If you made a mistake, a genuine mistake, and yes, and most of it was safety infractions, which is right,
mm,
very important when you're in a large chemical industry, is if it was a genuine accident, there would be a level of understanding, is the right way. But if you deliberately did something, or more importantly, and this goes back to trust again, is you deliberately deceived somebody, then the punishment will rightly very, very harsh and very
yeah,
swift, which is important. So I'm thinking again, and it was interesting you were saying about sociopaths and psychopaths as well. I mean, they found that, of course, you get a higher concentration of those the further you go up the organization because of the competitive element. And when I worked in consultancy, they used to have an up or out thing, a bit like your Harvard Yale analogy,
mm,
where for each role they'd have two people competing with each other. And when I look at that myself now, I think it's absolutely nuts. They try to institute it. You actually want the right people, as you said, in the right place at the right time with the right thinking and the right ethos. And that doesn't mean people are soft, right? That's what sometimes people get
mm.
the misapprehension or the misunderstanding around that. But what would be interesting to get your perspective is that, we talk about trust, right, and the importance of it. And that in itself can be itself quite glib. It's a big topic, although it's heavily nuanced, and, we touched on it earlier on, can we be trustful all the time? Well, we aim to be that. Are there any situations in your experiences where, not long term, but it's in the short term, there is a risk of breaking trust for the greater good? Because I think our listeners would like to hear that because they're probably sitting back and thinking, well, that's great. We've talked about trust, but it doesn't, it's wonderful. But, when does it go wrong and how do you deal with it? And there may not be situations, but I'd be interested to get your perspective, Robin.
Oh, I think trust and loyalty are personal interactions. They're not business interactions, they're personal
Mm,
interactions. And so you build that trust, which is followed by that loyalty over a long period of time. So one of the principles of leadership that I espouse is integrity. You have to have integrity, and you have to set an example over a long period of time. It's very easy to be loyal to somebody or say the right things or do the right things for a few months. And, you know, you can get away with it. You can't get away with it over a lifetime. By the time you get to 50, everyone knows who you are. Everyone knows someone who knows who you are, and your reputation will precede you. So you can get away with it when you're young. You can get away with it and make a few bucks for 10 years, and then nobody will want anything to do with you after that. Or if they do, they're going to make sure you pay them up front. And that's something you have to develop. I think the mnemonic I use is ICE: integrity, courage, and example. ICE, and I call them the three principles of management, or no, not management at all, leadership. And I was going to put vision in front of it, but it would have been vice, so I don't think that's appropriate. So ICE, and I called Zelensky the Iceman of the North because he shows those three principles. Integrity, refused to leave Ukraine when the Russians were coming across the border and approaching Kiev. He stayed on the ground. He wasn't going to run away to Lvov or even to Poland. Courage. He had the courage to stay there. He had the courage to face up to it. He had the courage to put himself in the front of his troops, and still does. And example, he has set an example now for the past 3 years, an example of integrity, an example of sacking people, good people who are good in their jobs when they're caught being corrupt. And he's getting the respect of the whole world. Now everybody's sitting back going, well, how did this, fairly successful businessman who began his life as a as an actor and a comedian end up being this amazing world leader. Well, come the day, come the man, and he certainly is the man. And I did a presentation. I hosted an event in Tallinn, in Estonia, last year, and gave an award to the head of the Ukrainian Postal Service, and gave this very brief speech about what I thought of Zelensky. And I got a message from him the next day, from President Zelensky the next day, saying 2 words: "Thank you." Wow. And I was really moved and touched by that. I thought that was awesome. But those principles apply to everybody, and we build our characters on our core values, and we get to become young adults, and at that point in our life, we actually choose the core values that we were going to build on for the rest of our life. And we can choose core values that are based on success, on money, on profit, on winning, or we can base our core values on decency and consideration and honesty and trust. We have to make those choices at some point as a young adult, and then we have to stand on them with principle. And that's where we develop our integrity. If we can do that, and if we can guide our young, successful adults into making the correct choices at that stage of their life, then we're going to develop very, very good, decent people for the long-term future. But if we give them foundations of being predators, of our success being on how much money we've got and how many toys we have and how much control we have of other people, and we consider that to be successful leadership and successful business, then we're damaging our community and our country and our future for the long term.
It's really interesting, Ben. I mean, I've got a few things, but I want to give you the opportunity to come in, Ben.
No, I was listening to that and I couldn't agree more. What you're saying is, yeah, a very accurate description of society and what is necessary at the moment. I was really one thing I have taken away from the way you've spoken is you have. When you were talking, you combine several concepts. So when you're talking about integrity, you're talking about courage because of the need to have the courage in order to be who you truly are. So in order to be integral. Similarly, you've talked about trust and loyalty. So not only are you finding trust important, you're finding that trust encourages loyalty. So I wondered, am I right in that? Do you always think in terms of these two-directional concepts?
Yeah, I think everything I do at this stage of my life is built on understanding those choices. I built an organization called London Karate over 25 years. And I had 1,000 children that I was teaching at one point, but about 50 adults on top of that. And I was building everything on character. It wasn't on, the whole process was built on character. And as I was working hard on developing the character of my students, I became aware that I was also building my own character as well. And so you had this business that was growing and making a profit and doing very well. But the process was ethical and it was successful because the parents supported it, and the parents were the people that were paying. And it was very easy in London at that time. You're talking about the late 90s, early 2000s, to get sucked into the process of let's sign them into contracts, let's make direct debits, let's be very unforgiving. And I chose not to. I chose to be firm, but also to be kind. And people knew exactly what to expect of me. And they would come to me and say, well, little Johnny's broken his leg and he's fallen off the climbing frame, and I've paid for a 3-month term. What can we do? I say, well, we can refund you half the term, or we can just carry it over until his leg gets better. And people would say to me, well, that's naive, Robin. They've already paid. It's not your fault they've fallen off the climbing frame. And I said, well, no, it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the right business thing to do as well, because that mum then tells all the other mums, oh, isn't he wonderful? What a great thing he did. He gave me the money back, or he carried it over till the next time. He understood how I was. So the customers trusted me. The customers trusted my product. The customers trusted the system that I was operating. I wasn't just standing up there and espousing certain virtues to my students and then not living them in my own life. And that worked very, very well at my very small level. But I honestly believe that those same principles work at every single level, especially at the highest levels of leadership and politics. They don't seem to exist there, unfortunately, especially in the United Kingdom at the moment. We've got government after government that's tearing themselves to pieces because there doesn't seem to be any standard that anybody at the very, very top is conveying to the people beneath them. There's nobody there that's inspiring. There's nobody with charisma. There's nobody with deep-seated foundations that their character's built on. And so they're flip-flopping all over the place, lying, telling you what you think they want you want to hear, working for votes, marketing, rather than actually leading people and inspiring them.
Yeah,
I think I went on into a different subject there, but
no, that's fine. I mean,
you let me go.
No, that's brilliant, because that in itself is very inspiring, and it's got me thinking that one of the things that Ben and I have been looking at as some of our research around trust is there's a thing called the Edelman Report, which is published every year, and we've gone back to it's about trust in organizations, and there's a lot of data showing that it's going down. So 22 report, then 23 report, then 24 report, etc. And what is interesting is that it's interesting you do bring in politics, because they segment into 3 different groups. There's a sort of corporate and business, then there's NGOs, and also politics. And it's interesting when you look at the trust levels in their data, is that of the groups, and of course trust is at a low with all of them, ironically, people trust corporations more than they trust NGOs, and certainly more than they trust politics. It's a lower level. So a couple of sort of follow-on questions there is, each year this trust level's been going down and down and down. Do you think we can turn it round is one question. Is it possible that we've hit the bottom of the trough in your view, and what do we need to do it? And it was interesting, you talked about consistency right at the head of this conversation about being a consistent leader, which is something both Ben and I firmly believe in and have written about before. But we also look on 2 attributes that support trust as well. In fact, we see it as a 3-legged stool, that if trust is the base, you need consistency, authenticity to be authentic, and you need to be transparent as well. So I know that's a bit of like a sort of a double-edged question, but one, do you think we can get out of it, and how do you think the other attributes play out, Robin?
Okay, well, if we look at the subject of politics, everybody blames the people in charge, the politicians, the people in the cabinet, the people in government, the members of parliament. But we've got an electoral system now that is electing the most scheming and devious and inadequate people to become the leaders of our nation. Something is wrong with the process. Something is wrong with the process at the foundations of politics that's allowing these people to rise to the top and become the controlling people of our nation. They're not the best minds. They're not charismatic. They don't have great leadership potential. They're not trusted by the people, because the people sense that they're inadequate, and the people know that they're being lied to. They know that somebody's trying to sell them a second-hand car with bad tires. And the person saying, no, the tires are fine, they'll last you another 10,000 miles. And the simple fact is, you're looking at the car and going, no, that's not true. but eventually they convince enough people that, yeah, to buy the car. And we've got Keir Starmer at the moment, who's made a complete mess of the last 100 days, and partly because he comes across as somebody who should be managing a warehouse somewhere and ticking off pages in a book. He doesn't come across as in any way inspirational. And everyone goes, oh, yes, but look at what we had before. Yes, what we had before was a complete disaster as well. They're more much of a oneness of inadequate people who can't do a very good job, who have been sucked into a process that promotes their inadequacy because it's mundane and mediocre, and it's stuck in the middle there trying to please everybody. Nobody's taking the reins. Nobody's controlling the horses. Nobody's coaching the team. Nobody knows how to build a team because all the best people are saying, I'm not going to play politics. It's full of idiots. I'm not going to go down that path. And the people that are in politics today are in it because they're in it as a profession. They're not altruistic. They're not philanthropic. They just simply want to be in power. And they'll do anything they can to be in power rather than help the people and run the country. They sit on two opposite sides in Parliament rather than as the European trend of sitting in a semicircle. So we all seem to be in the same group. They're supposed to be there to look after our people, to run our country and improve our lives. But the general impression of most ordinary hardworking people is that they're there for their own benefit. Bang, bang, bang.
Yeah, which is basically the or the lack of the foundations of trust. There's no trust there whatsoever because there is a lack of consistency because, as you say, they're flip-flopping all over the place. There's a lack of authenticity because we don't believe what's emanating from their mouths, and there's certainly a lack of transparency when we've seen all the sleaze allegations as well. But do you think there is a way out of it? I mean, I know I agree with you that, cause and effect processes can drive the outcome. The wrong processes drive the wrong outcome. But do you think there's any hope there, Robin?
I would love to see. I mean, I don't have the power to make changes, but I would love to see the executive committees of the major parties starting to choose people who are going to inspire and lead, who are going to carry a team forward, rather than somebody who it just simply wants to please everybody. There are only two prime ministers the United Kingdom have had over my lifetime who have been known by their first names. One was Maggie and the other was Boris. Now, agree or disagree, that's not the point. The simple fact is they had charisma. The world knew who they were by their first names. Maggie became known as the Iron Lady. I think Boris Johnson was carved up by the left-wing media over a long 3-year campaign. Whether or not you agree with what he did or his processes, he had charisma. We've got Mr. Starmer right now. We had Liz Truss last year and Rishi Sunak, and we had about half a dozen others in the previous year. But none of them are really known by their first names. And we're certainly never going to know Starmer by his first name because everybody is already calling him Starmer. And that's not a good sign for the long-term future. Change needs to be made at the very, very bottom by the executive committees of the major parties. And they've got to turn around and say, we're going to have to pick people that are going to make a difference. We're going to have to pick people that are going to upset the hard left and they're going to upset the hard right. And they're going to say, no, I want to pull this huge moderate moral majority that sit in the middle, what I've coined the phrase, the far center, and pull them along behind me and say, don't listen to them, they're idiots. Don't listen to them on the other end, they're idiots too. It's us we're talking about. It's us should be controlling this country. And we need people with the courage and the integrity to do that and stand up and basically kick away the stool.
Now, it's really interesting you say that because I think, as you say, and it's, being dispassionate about, an individual's political position, which is what we're trying to do, is that I think you're right. There's no doubt there's a media storm that didn't help Boris at all. But also his own internal people were playing games as problem. So he was, he was got at from all sorts of areas. And unfortunately, we've seen that before. But you're right. It goes to your point about integrity again, isn't it? And the ICE model again. Where is the integrity? And you have to have not just integrity in the people, but you have to have integrity of the process. And if the process is flawed, which I tend to agree with you, it is. And it's interesting. I mean, Ben and I have talked at length, to mean about what they sometimes call the Overton window, that large moral majority in the middle. And actually, without getting political again, if you look at the centre left and the centre right, generally, if you get them talking in a pub or a bar, they actually want the same things. The only differences that they have is that the way to go about it might vary slightly, but ultimately that large moral majority does want the same thing. So it's really interesting. So I think you're right. There's certainly down, if we look at the UK political system, there is definitely, I think, an opportunity for change and looking at the process. What about the corporate world, Robin? Just as we around, any thoughts?
Yeah.
Because you've worked in
Yeah, I
business.
would say in the corporate world, again, getting the right people to the top is huge, and choosing the right people for their integrity rather than their bullying processes is important. But there was a thought going through my head just then, which has just swept itself away. It'll come back to me. But there's a no. I'll ask me that question again.
Oh, well,
It'll
we
come
just saying,
back
well,
to me.
we talked about integrity in the process, obviously, in
Yeah,
the political sphere, and that sort of applies to NGOs as well because they're sort of connected to an extent. But what about the corporate world? What about the integrity in the process? And is there an opportunity for us to improve the integrity in the processes of the corporate world? And is there an opportunity for trust to build up? Because this is what our intent is with engaging, in our small way. This is what Ben and I are trying to do with this software, and it's going to be a very small impact, by
mm,
the way. We know that,
yeah,
but it's a start.
yeah. I think it's you've got to have businesses that take a long-term view of where they want to get to. They're working on a 20, 30-year program, and they take a long-term view of their staff and their human resources and how they're going to manage their human resources. That they take a long-term view about the quality of their people, that they're going to keep people who are happy to tick boxes and sit in the store for the next 30 years and take their 4 weeks holiday every year. And they're going to keep them and look after them. And they're going to keep people who are right at the other end of the spectrum, who are ambitious and thrusting. But the whole process built on one of trust and integrity and believing. No, some people abuse trust. And, so I'm not suggesting that people should be naive. You can build trust with people by being fairly mean to them. You can build trust with people by pulling someone to their office and saying, listen, you messed up here today. You shouldn't have done this. You should have done that. Why didn't you do this? You can be mean to people, providing you're mean to everybody in exactly the same way when they make the same mistakes. And
That's
that builds trust, because I know I'm coming into your office and I'm going to get my ass kicked because I should have done something I didn't do, and that's fine. There's nothing naive about punishing people when they're wrong. There is something very, very wrong about humiliating people when they're wrong. I call bullying. I coined the term isolation, humiliation, intimidation, the three principles of bullying. Isolation, humiliation, intimidation. If you humiliate people, you've made an enemy for life. They'll walk away. They'll carry on doing their job, but they won't do it any harder than they need to. They'll do just enough to satisfy the process. So you build loyalty by being consistent with people. You build loyalty by being firm with people, but also by having that tempered with kindness, with a certain sense of understanding that people do make mistakes sometimes. Somebody keeps making the same mistakes, then they're in the wrong job, and find a better place for them sometimes rather than simply firing them. It depends. But when it works in reverse as well. When a member of your staff is disloyal to you, then you got to let them go, because it doesn't matter what happens, they're going to be disloyal again. That's in their character.
Interesting. No, absolutely. And the common thread through that point was consistency, which is what you described right at the head of our conversation today. So we're sort of getting close to the time where we want to wrap up, and this has been a really powerful and wonderful discussion. Any final thoughts, Ben, before we close?
Um, no, other than really just to thank Robin. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I could have gone on for hours listening and participating in it. So thank you very much.
Hmm.
That one thought that I lost came back to me,
Please do.
and it was there, and it was sitting there, and I was ready to go with it, and then something else crept in. It's malicious gossip.
Hmm.
The one thing that will undermine any corporation, any institution, is malicious gossip. And if anybody can do anything to prevent malicious gossip in any organization, then they're going to build a team. The second malicious gossip creeps in, confront it. Bring people into the office, say, I understand you said this, I understand you said that. Let's deal with this now, here, at the moment, not tomorrow, not next week. Let's see where it goes. Deal with it. Malicious gossip is the most dangerous thing to any team, any level, in any organization.
No, absolutely. That totally resonates with me. And I've seen that in numerous situations in my corporate career, particularly in corporate consulting, which can get very acerbic and putrid in certain areas, as well as people are trying to climb their way up and score points over somebody else. So just wrapping this up, Robin, absolutely wonderful to have you on board. Really powerful thoughts and reflections. I'm certainly going to take away a lot. Particularly, I like your ICE model around integrity, courage, and example. You know, your real life examples, your passion for the subject around trust. You know, the point about, integrity in organizations and in politics. And I love the point about malicious gossip. So that's really wonderful. So just before we wrap up, Robin, where can, you're on LinkedIn, you're prevalent elsewhere. Where can people follow you, Robin, as well?
Yeah, I've just started writing every day on Substack, which works really, really well for me because it's a written process and I love to write. You can find me at robinhorsfall.com. You can find my books at robinhorsfall.com. You can also find them on Amazon. And just if you lose all that, then just put Robin Horsfall in Google, and and I'll come up. And I look forward to hearing from people.
Great.
And I'll add some links to that into the show notes.
Yes. Brilliant. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening, and look out for our next podcast.